Since the day I was connected with this thing feeding on me, I have sleepless nights and endless days. The witchman led me to be in this trouble, endless tears and pain. When it comes, I feel by the heart. Welcome to another gripping episode of Confessions. I'm your host, Solution Uncle. Today we bring you the story of a woman bewitched and trapped in endless pain. She is offering 100,000 United States dollars to anyone who can connect her with the true man of God to pray for her deliverance. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this desperate plea of salvation. Good morning, Solution Uncle. I have this confession to share. Please hide my identity. You can call me Melissa. I am a 40-year woman from Zimbabwe. I come from a village where life has been always tough. We lived in a modest house made of brick and mortar with a tin roof that rattled whenever the wind blew too hard. The floors made of compacted dirt, and every corner of our home was a testament of our struggle. But despite all that, it was a place filled with love, laughter, and warmth of family. My husband Tendai is a good man. He did everything I wanted, even though you could see that this person is struggling to make it. He is hardworking and kind, always putting his family first. We have three beautiful children, two boys and a girl. Tendai worked as a farmer, toiling in the fields every day to provide for us. It wasn't easy, and there were times when we didn't know where our next meal would come from, but somehow we always managed to get by. As the years passed, things got harder. The economy in Zimbabwe collapsed, and the jobs became scarce. Prices of basic necessities soared, and we find ourselves sinking deeper into poverty. Tendai did his best, but the weight of our situation was beginning to crush him. I could see in his eyes every time he came home after a long day in the field, exhausted, worried, and burdened by the knowledge that he couldn't provide for us the way he wanted to. It was during this time that I began to hear stories about South Africa. People in our village spoke of it as a land of opportunity, a place where jobs were plentiful and money flowed like water. They said that if you were willing to work hard, you could make a good living there and send money back home to support your family. The stories gave me hope. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to change our situation. I talked to Tendai about it one evening as we sat outside our house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with sounds of crickets creeping in the tall grass. I told him that I wanted to go to South Africa, that I believed I could find work there and send money back to help him and the children. At first, Tendai was against the idea. He didn't want us to be separated, and he was afraid of what might happen to me in a foreign country. But as we talked more, he began to see that we didn't have many other options. In the end, we made the difficult decision together. We would borrow money from a relative to pay for my journey, and I would leave for South Africa in search of a better life. It was one of the hardest decisions I have ever had to make. The thought of leaving my husband and children behind was almost unbearable, but I knew I had to do it for them. I promised Tendai that I would come back as soon as I had saved enough money to give us a better life. The day I left, Tendai and the children came with me to the bus station. We stood together in the early morning light. The cool air filled with fresh rain. My children clung to me, their little faces filled with confusion and sadness. They didn't fully understand why I had to leave, and I struggled to find the words to explain to them. As the bus pulled up, I hugged Tendai tightly, tears streaming down my face. He held me close, whispering words of comfort and encouragement. Be strong, my love, he said. We will be here waiting for you. Just come back to us safely. I boarded the bus with a heavy heart, watching through the window as my family grew smaller and smaller in the distance. I couldn't help but wonder if I was making the right choice, but it was too late to turn back now. I had to believe that things would work out. The journey to South Africa was long and tiring. We traveled for days, passing through cities and towns, each one different from the last. The bus was crowded with people, most of whom were also heading to South Africa in search of work. We shared stories, hopes, and fears, trying to keep our spirits up despite uncertainty that lay ahead. When we finally crossed the border into South Africa, I felt a mix of excitement and action. I had arrived in the land of opportunity, but I knew that my journey was far from over. I still had to find a job and a place to stay. I had no idea what awaited me in this new country, but I was determined to make it work. When I arrived in South Africa, I was filled with hope. I had left my family behind, but I believed that the sacrifices I made would be worth it. I thought that once I found a job, I would be able to send money back home and eventually return to Zimbabwe with enough savings to provide my children with a better future. But reality soon shattered my dreams. The city I arrived in was bustling with activity. Tall buildings lined the streets and people hurried about their businesses, seemingly obviously to those around them. The noise was overwhelming with a constant hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the occasional blaring of car horns. It was so different from the quiet rural village I had left behind. I felt like a small fish in a vast ocean, lost and out of place. I started my job search the very next day. I walked the streets going from one shop to another, asking if they were in need of help. I applied for every job I could find, cleaning, cooking, selling goods at the market. But everywhere I went, I was met with the same response. We don't hire foreigners. It didn't matter that I was willing to work hard or that I had experience in many of the jobs I applied for. All they saw was a woman from Zimbabwe, and that was not enough for them to turn me away. As the days turned into weeks, I began to realize just how difficult it was going to be. The little money I had brought with me was quickly running out, and I had no income to replace it. I was staying in a cheap, rundown hostel, sharing a room with other women who were in similar situations. The room was small and crumpled, with peeling paint on the walls and a single flickering light bulb that barely illuminated the space. We slept on the thin mattresses on the floor with only a threadbare blanket to keep us warm at night. The other women who were from different parts of Africa, Nigeria, Congo, Ethiopia, and they all had their own stories of hardship and struggle. Some had been in South Africa for years, unable to find steady work, while others like me were newcomers still clinging to the hope that things would get better. We bonded over our shared experiences, offering each other support and comfort in our darkest moments. But there was always a sense of hopelessness that hung over us like a dark cloud. We had all come here with dreams of a better life, but those dreams were quickly fading away. One day, as I walked through a crowded market, I witnessed something that shook me to my core. A group of men had cornered a young woman who, like me, was a foreigner. She was from Nigeria, and they accused her of taking away jobs from South Africans. The men shouted at her, calling her names and hurling insults. She tried to defend herself, saying that she was just trying to make a living like everyone else, but they won't listen. They began to push her, shoving her back and forth between them as if she were a toy. I wanted to help her, but I was too afraid. I had heard stories of what happened to people who got involved in situations like this. The xenophobic violence that had been brewing for years was reaching new heights at that time. The foreigners were being targeted more and more, and I knew that if I stepped in, I could become a victim too. So I stood there, frozen in fear, as the men continued to torment the young woman. Eventually, the situation escalated. One of the men grabbed a brick from the ground and struck the woman on the head. She fell on the ground, blood streaming from the wound, and the men quickly disappeared into the crowd as if nothing had happened. The woman lay there unconscious and bleeding while people walked by, some glancing at her with pity, others simply ignoring her. That was the first time I truly understood the danger I was in. It didn't matter that I was just trying to survive, that I wasn't hurting anyone. In the eyes of some of them, I was an enemy simply because I was a foreigner. I realized then that I would have to be careful, that I couldn't trust anyone. My only goal now was to find a way to survive in this hostile environment. As the weeks moved, my situation grew more desperate. I had been in South Africa for over 6 months, and I was no closer to finding a job than I had been on the day I arrived. My hopes of sending money back home to my family were fading, and I was starting to lose faith in myself. I spent my days wandering the streets, searching for any opportunity that might come my way, but every door was closed to me. I had become invisible, a ghost moving through the city, unnoticed by those around me. I could feel myself slipping into despair, the weight of my situation pressing down on me until it was almost unbearable. I missed my husband and children more than words could express. Every night as I lay on the thin mattress in the hostel, I would close my eyes and picture their faces trying to hold on the memory of their smiles, their laughter. But as time passed, those memories became hard to recall, and I began to feel as though I was losing a part of myself. It was during this time that I started to see the darker side of the city. At night, when the streets were quieter and the shadows grew longer, the true nature of the place was revealed. The hostel where I stayed was in a rough part of the town, and it wasn't safe to be out after dark. Gangs roamed the streets looking for easy targets, and it wasn't uncommon to hear the sounds of gunshots in distance. The hostel itself was a haven for people like me, foreigners. We had nowhere else to go, but it was also a place where desperation reigned and where people did whatever they had to do in order to survive. I began to notice that some of the women in the hostel had started to turn to prostitution as a way to make money. They would go out at night and standing on the street corners, waiting for men to pick them up. It was dangerous work, but it paid, and for many of them, it was the only option left. At first, I couldn't imagine doing something like that. The thought of selling my body was repulsive to me, and I vowed that I would never sink to that level. But as days passed and my situation grew more dire, I began to question my resolve. One night, as I sat in the small common area of the hostel, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, one of the women approached me. Her name was Amina, and she was from Nigeria. She had been in South Africa for 2 years, working as a prostitute to support her family back home. She had a toughness about her, resilience that I admired, but there was also a madness in her eyes, a wearing that came from living a life of constant struggle. Melissa, she said, sitting down beside me. I see you are having a hard time. I've been watching you and I know what you are going through. It's not easy being a foreigner in this country. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The lump in my throat made it hard to swallow, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Amina reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. You don't have to suffer like this, she continued. There is a way to make money to survive. I know it's not what you want, but sometimes we have to do things we never thought would be doing. I looked at her, my heart heavy with dread. I knew that she was suggesting, and part of me wanted to scream, to run away from the idea, but another part of me, the part that was tired and desperate, wanted to listen. Amina could see the conflict in my eyes, and she squeezed my hand again. Think about it, she said softly. You don't have to make a decision now, but just know that you are not alone. We are all in this together, and we have to look out for each other. She got up and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for a long time, staring at the floor, my mind racing. Could I really do it? Could I sell my boat just to survive? The thought of it made me feel sick, but the alternative was worse. I couldn't go back to Zimbabwe empty-handed, and I couldn't keep living like this, with no money, no hope. That night I made the hardest decision of my life. I told myself that it was just temporary, that I would do it until I had enough money to get back to my feet. But deep down, I knew that once I crossed that line, there would be no going back. The first time I went out on the streets was the most terrifying experience of my life. Amina came with me, guiding me through the process, showing me where to stand, what to say, how to negotiate with the men who approached us. The street corner where we worked was dimly lit with flickering street lights casting eerie shadows on the pavement. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and stale alcohol, and the sound of distant sirens echoed through the night. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Every time a car slowed down, I felt a surge of panic. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay, to keep my feet planted on the ground. I needed the money, and there was no other way to get it. The first man who approached me was older, with graving hair and a slight punch. He rolled down the window of his car and monitored for me to come closer. I hesitated, glancing at Amina for reassurance. She nodded, giving me a small encouragement smile, and took a deep breath and walked over to the car, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. What's your price? The man asked, his voice gruff and impatient. I scrambled over my words, unsure of what to say. I had never done this before. I felt completely out of my depth. Amina had told me to start high, to negotiate, but my mind was blank. I blurted out a number too low. I realized too late, but the man agreed without hesitation. He unlocked the car door, and I climbed in, my heart pounding in my ears. The drive to his apartment was a blur. I barely registered the buildings passing by, the streetlights casting long shadows across the road. My hands were clammy, and I would feel my stomach churning with nerves. I tried to calm myself, to focus on the money I would earn, but all I could think about was shame and disgust I felt. When we arrived at his apartment, he led me inside without a word. The place was small and sparsely furnished with a worn couch and a table cluttered with empty beer bottles. The man didn't waste any time. He pointed to the bedroom, indicating that I should go in. My legs felt weak As I walked towards the door, my mind screamed at me to stop, to turn around and leave, but I couldn't. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I did what I do, forcing myself to detach from the situation. To go numb, I tried to block out the man's touch, his grants of pressure, the way he treated me like I was nothing more than an object. When it was over, he handed me a wad of cash and told me to leave. I took the money, my hands shaking, and left the apartment as quickly as I could. As I walked back to the hostel, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had done it. I had crossed the line, and there was no going back. The money in my hand felt like a weight dragging me down, but I knew I needed it. I had no other choice. When I got back to the hostel, Amina was waiting for me. She didn't say anything, just gave me a knowing look and a small nod. I went to my room and sat on the mattress, staring at the money in my hand. I had made more in one night than I had in months of searching for work, but the price I had paid for it was too high. Over the next weeks, I continued to go out on the streets. It didn't get any easier. Every time I climbed into a car with a stranger, I felt a piece of myself die. I tried to focus on the money, on the thought of sending it back to my family, but it was hard to push away the feelings of shame and self-loathing. I began to lose track of time. The days blended into nights, and the nights into days. My life had become a cycle of survival, nothing more. I was existing, but I wasn't really living. The money I earned allowed me to send a little back to my husband, but it wasn't nearly enough to make a real difference. I felt like I was trapped in a never ending nightmare with no way out. One evening, after a particularly different night, I was approached by a man unlike any of the others he'd encountered. He was older, with a commanding presence and an air of wealth around him. He drove a sleek black car that looked out of place in the rough neighborhood where I worked. When he rolled down the window, I could see that he was well dressed, his suit tailored to perfection. "Are you looking for work?" he asked, his voice smooth and confident. I hesitated. There was something about him that made uneasy, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He didn't seem like the other men who picked up women on the street. There was a coldness in his eyes, a calculating look that sent a shiver down my spine. "I might be," I replied cautiously. "What kind of work are you offering?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I can offer you more money than you ever made before," he said, "but it's a special kind of work. Not everyone is cut out for it." I felt a sense of dread creeping over me, but I couldn't afford to turn down the offer. The promise of the money was too tempting, and I was desperate. I nodded, indicating that I was interested. "Good," he said, his smile widening. "Get in, and I'll take you to my house. We can discuss the details there." I knew I should have refused. Every instinct in my body was telling me that this was a bad idea, but I ignored them. I was tired of struggling, tired of living in fear and desperation. If this man could offer me a way out, then I was willing to take the risk. The drive to his house was long. As we left the city behind, the buildings gave way, sprawling estates with manicured lawns and tall iron gates. The man's house was one of the largest I had ever seen, a massive mansion with marble columns and a long driveway lined with trees. It was the kind of place that seemed like it belonged in a movie, not in real life. When we arrived, the men led me inside, and I was struck by the opulence of the place. The floors were made of polished wood, and the walls were adorned with expensive artwork. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, casting a warm golden light over everything. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and I felt out of place in my cheap, worn clothes. The men led me to a sitting room and monitored for me to sit down. I did so, my heart pounding in my chest. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat across from me, studying me with those cold, calculating eyes. The work I am offering is simple, he said, taking a sip of his drink, but it requires a certain level of endurance if you can handle it. I will pay you well, more than you ever had on the streets. What kind of work is it? I asked, my voice trembling. The man leaned forward, his expression serious. There is a room in this house, a special room. Inside there is a creation that needs to be fed. But it doesn't eat just anything. It requires a specific kind of nourishment, something only a woman can provide. I felt a chill run down my spine as his words sank in. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man's smile returned, but it was devoid of warmth. Menstrual blood, he said simply. The creature feeds on it, and you, my dear, will be one to provide it. I stared at him in disbelief, my mind reeling. The thought of what he was asking me to do was horrifying, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the promise of money. I had no idea what kind of creature he was talking about, but the way he spoke about it made it clear that this was no ordinary job. I can make it so that you are on your cycles continuously, the man continued. You will be able to feed the creature as much as it needs, and in return I will pay you handsomely. You never have to work on the streets again. The room seemed to close in around me as I processed what he was saying. I wanted to refuse, to get up and leave, but something held me back. I was trapped, caught between my need for money and the horror of what he was asking me to do. I need time to think about it, I said, my voice shaking. The man nodded as if he had expected that response. Of course, take all the time you need, but remember this offer won't be on the table forever. He stood up and walked to the door, leaving me alone in the sitting room. I sat there for what I felt like hours, my mind racing. I knew that if I accepted this offer, I would be stepping into a nightmare, but the alternative was going back to a life of poverty and desperation with no hope of escape. In the end, I accepted the man's offer. I told myself that I didn't have a choice, that I had to do whatever it took to survive. But deep down, I knew that I was making a deal with the devil. I was selling my soul for money, and I would have to live with the consequences. The man kept his promise. He made it so that I was on my menstrual cycle continuously, just as he had said. The pain was unbearable at first, a constant throbbing ache in my lower abdomen that never went away. But the worst part was feeling of being trapped, of knowing that I was nothing more than a tool to feed a creature that I had never seen before. The room where the creature was kept was in the center of the mansion, hiding away from the rest of the house. It was a dark and cold, with stone walls and a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick with the smell of the damp earth, and the floor was covered in a layer of dust that had settled over the years. The creature itself was a horrifying sight, a massive coiled serpent with scales as black as night and eyes that glowed and sickly yellow. It slithered out of the shadows when I entered the room, its tongue flicking out to taste the air. I could feel its hunger, its need for nourishment that only I could provide. Every day I would go into the room and offer myself to the creature. It would feed on the blood that flowed from my body, its eyes gleaming with satisfaction as it drank its fill. The pain was excruciating, but I forced myself to enjoy it. I'd no other choice. The man paid me well, just as he had promised. I was able to send money back to my family, more than I had ever dreamed of. But the price I paid was too high. I felt like I was losing a part of myself every time I entered that room, a piece of my soul being consumed along with the blood. As the days moved, I began to lose track of time. My life began a blur of pain, darkness with no end sight. I was swept in a nightmare with no way out. The money I earned felt like a curse, a constant reminder of the horror I was living. I thought about my family often, wondering if they knew that I was going through. I tried to write to them, to tell them about my life, but the words couldn't come. How could I explain what I had become? How could I tell them that I was feeding a monster, that I was trapped in a cycle of pain and despair? As time went on, I began to feel the effects of what I was doing. My body was weak, drained of energy from constant blood loss. I was in a state of perpetual existence, barely able to get through the day. The pain in my abdomen had become a dull, constant ache, and I would feel my health deteriorating. I knew that I couldn't go on like this forever, but I didn't know how to escape. The man who had hired me was always watching, always making sure that I was doing what I was supposed to do. I was a prisoner in his house with no way out, and there were other men who seemed to be like secretaries who could be all over around the place. One day, as I was lying in bed too weak to move, I heard a knock on my door. I was shocked to see Amina. How is she linked to these men? How did she was able to be in the room? She had found out where I was staying. I had come to see you. When I saw her, I was out of words. Melissa, what have you done to yourself? She asked, her voice filled with concern. I tried to explain, but words caught in my throat. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, and before I knew it, I was sobbing uncontrollable. Amina sat down beside me and held stroking my hair as I cried. It's going to be okay, she whispered. We'll find a way to get you out of here. But even as she said the words, I could see doubt in her eyes. We both knew that it wouldn't be easy. The man who had hired me was powerful and he wouldn't let me go without a fight. In the days that followed, Amina tried to come up with a plan to help me escape. She talked to people she knew, trying to find a way to get me out of the mansion and back to the city, but every plan she came up with seemed doomed to fail. The man was always one step ahead, always watching, and I started suspecting that they might be knowing each other. They are playing games with me. I began to lose hope. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of despair with no way to save myself. The man I had earned meant nothing to me anymore. It was just a reminder of the price I had paid, the life I had sacrificed. One night, as I lay in the bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep feeding the creature. I couldn't keep living in this nightmare. I had to find a way out, even if it meant risking everything. The next day, I made a decision. I would confront the men who had trapped me here. I would demand my freedom, no matter what the cost. I knew it was dangerous, that he would kill me or worse, but I didn't care anymore. I had to try. I waited until the house was quiet, until the man was alone in his stud. I had seen him go in there many times, always with a drink in hand, always lost in thoughts. I took a deep breath and made my way to the study, my heart pounding in my chest. When I entered the room, I looked up, surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. "I want out," I said, my voice trembling with fear and determination. "I can't do this anymore." The man's expression darkened and he set his drink down on the table. "You made a deal," he said coldly. "You can't back out now." "I don't care about the deal," I replied, my voice gained strength. "I can't go on like this. You are killing me." The man stood up, towering over me with a look of fury in his eyes. "You think you can just walk away?" he hissed. "You are nothing but a tool, a means to end. You belong to me now." I felt a surge of anger and fear, and I knew that I had to stand my ground. "I don't belong to you," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not your slave. I'm a human being. I deserve to be free." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But then, to my surprise, he laughed, a cold, cruel laugh that sent shivers down my spine. "You want to be free? You need. Fine, go ahead. But don't think for a second that you will be ever free of me. I own you, Melissa. You will never escape." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, trembling with fear and anger. I knew that he was right, that I would never truly be free as long as he was alive. But I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to leave, even if it meant running for the rest of my life. That night I packed my things and left the mansion, slipping out into the darkness without looking back. I didn't know where I was going or how I would survive, but I knew that I had to try. The price of wealth had been too high, and I had paid it in blood. Now all I wanted was to be free, to find a way to live without fear. As I walked through the dark, empty streets, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had escaped the nightmare, but I knew that the scars it had left on my soul would never fully heal. The creature's hunger had consumed a part of me, and I would carry that darkness with me for the rest of my life. But I was alive and I was free, and that was enough for now. As I moved from one place to another in the streets, someone came across me. By that time, I was now afraid to talk with strangers, but I was out of ideas. I talked with that woman. She was a church leader from what she explained to me. She went with me and introduced me to her pastor. They started doing prayers for me, even though the discharge was not coming to an end. But we fasted for 40 days in the mountain with the group of church members. We were fasting, we were praying till I was okay. They looked for sponsors to sponsor me from faraway countries who are also part of the church. They helped me. But there is still this problem which is in me. Sometimes when the discharge starts, it will take some time to end. When it's my cycle time, it takes a lot of time to end, and I'm seeking for solution. I'm seeking for solution. As of now, I'm preparing to go back to Zimbabwe. I'll come back to you, Solution Angle, explaining how is my family, how they are doing. But this is the problem. If anyone can help me, I will pay. I will pay him or I will pay him. Here's my number or my sister. Listeners, I won't give you the number. I won't give you the number. But we just pray. We just pray. If you know a Christian church near you, deep down in the comment section, drop your comment. Drop your comment. Thank you so much, my sister, for sharing this story with us. We have learned from your story and it was very educative. We should appreciate what we have. We should appreciate what we have. If this sister of us was going to appreciate the little things your husband was earning, there was not going to be all this. I hope the family is safe. And my sister, wherever you are listening us from, tell us if your family is safe. Would like to see those messages when you arrive. It's a sad story indeed. This is where poverty pushes us to be. And listeners, wherever you are, take this, note this down. When you're about to travel, when you're about to meet new people in life, you should pray. You should pray. I always told you each and every time we need to pray in every situation. Before traveling, before meeting new people, before searching for a job, everything will be okay. There are some people who went to that place and achieved. But just because you just go without praying, you can be ending up in these difficult times. That was another episode of African Confessions. Thank you so much, listeners from around the world, for supporting this show. Until we meet again in other episodes, bye for now.